Everyone, and welcome to the 73rd episode of the Atlas Society Asks. My name is Richard Salsman. I'm a senior scholar for the Atlas Society, and we're the leading nonprofit organization introducing young people to the ideas of Ayn Rand in creative ways, such as through animated videos and graphic novels. Now, today, I'm so delighted. I'm so pleased because we're joined by Dr. Carrie-Ann Biondi. And before I introduce her, though, I want to remind those of you, some of you are watching us on Zoom, some on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and you can use the comments section to type in comments and questions. And as we proceed through the interview, we'll get to as many of those as we can. So I'm viewing those as well as our wonderful guest. So quickly, Dr. Carrie-Ann Biondi was a professor of philosophy for 25 years, most recently at Marymount, Manhattan College. And she's the book review editor. She used to be the entire editor of the journal Reason Papers, an academic journal, a prestigious academic journal. She's also an advisor to the Great Connections, which is dedicated to education designed to strengthen students' reasoning skills and independent judgment. And there's going to be some aspects to that pedagogy that she loves that are going to come up today. So officially, welcome, Dr. Biondi. So glad to have you with us.
Thanks, Richard. It's great to be here talking with you.
Well, I have many questions, and I, as you know, have known you for quite a while, but also read your material more closely, especially in recent weeks, but have followed it over the years. I have to tell you, one of the more interesting juxtapositions I've seen in what you've said over the years. One time you said something like, there's something about university students I've learned over the years that they're not always quite prepared to come to college, and they don't really know what studying means, and they don't not the test take, all that kind of thing. And yet at the same time, you said you at age 5 said, I want to be a teacher. And so just the contrast between the two, like you knew what you wanted to do at 5. At 18, they're still not sure what they want to do. But talk about when you were 5, and how did you know that? How did you know that then, that you wanted to be a teacher?
Well, the story is, I remember quite vividly going to school. I actually had already learned how to read, not through any direct teaching by my mother, although she did read books to me. I remembered watching Electric Company, and it must have been phonetics, because I remember like songs that had sounds, and I figured out how to read before I got to kindergarten. So when I get there, they have all these cool books, and we didn't have many books at home. So I would play with build things, I would read books, and just be so excited about learning things, especially through these books, things I'd never heard of or seen before, and people around me hadn't talked about. So I would run home, and my little brother, who was a year younger than me, I would talk to him about what I was learning. I would show him things and try to teach him what I was learning, because I was so excited to learn about new things, and just had this burning curiosity. When he did get excited by what I was bringing home to him, and I would do this every year. And when I got old enough to create workbooks and things, I would make them for him. I would design these special write things and create math workbooks and have him do them and give him feedback. And if he asked me things I didn't understand, I would go to the library in school and read up on it so I could talk to him about what he was interested in. I just loved that process so much. I knew that I always wanted to keep doing that. And I found out that to do that, you have to be a teacher. So that was it. It sold me. That's that process, that transformation, the illumination is what sold me.
That's fascinating. I think one of the interesting things about the answer is sometimes you hear people will say a particular teacher, Mrs. Smith or Mr. Jones. I think your answer is so very interesting because it isn't specific to a person. You called it a burning curiosity. It was something about the whole process too. It wasn't just a one-off, right? A one-off teacher, a one-off class, because that might have been ephemeral. But this was more lasting. Obviously much more. At the time, was it hard to make friends because other girls and guys were nerdy like you? I'm not saying you were nerdy, but they didn't want to be a teacher like you. They wanted to be a fireman or a policeman or something.
Well, that's interesting you bring that up because I actually had very few friends growing up. I was viewed as unusual and of course weird, and I was okay with that because if they weren't interested in what I was interested in, I'd just go climb up in a tree and read a book or draw pictures and just do my own thing. So I actually have very few friends because of my peculiar interest.
Now, the decision, I think in the beginning, your interest was American studies, not really philosophy, but American studies. But somewhere along the way, did you think to yourself, I like American studies, but it really isn't that. It goes deeper. Is that the way you would put it, that it's deeper? What is American studies versus, I think I know what it is, but you can tell me, what is American studies versus going into philosophy, say?
Well, American studies I was intrigued by because I was interested in literature and history, political science, and the intersection of ideas. So if I wanted to study, say, liberty or individuality, how did that get reflected in literature of different time periods? How is it the ideas understood and embodied in political documents? Or manifested through political institutions? And how did people what were different views about that? How did they get embodied in those different aspects of human experience? So I was really interested in intellectual history, the history of ideas at the intersection of disciplines. But that only took me so far. I kept asking questions about, okay, well, is this conception of it true? Is this the right one? Is this system of government really good? And they're like, well, we don't deal with those questions in these disciplines. And I was finally recommended in grad school to go take a philosophy course. And I did. And I changed my major in graduate school because I was interested in issues of how to justify your beliefs to figure out what's true and what's really good. So, because I wanted to know what was real and to live really well.
Now, the American studies sounded interdisciplinary. When you went into philosophy, did you ever partway through think, oh my gosh, this is too specialized? It's not the interdisciplinary thing I expected, or no, you're saying no?
No, because the graduate program I went to at Bowling Green State University, it was actually at the time the only graduate program in philosophy. It was called a Ph.D. in applied philosophy.
Applied, yeah.
And so it was highly, even though I had a lot of philosophy to get under my belt, I had a lot to learn in terms of the different fields. All the professors who I took courses with were very well studied. For example, in economics, political theory, they encouraged me to keep reading literature so that my writing didn't become boring and dull and hyper analytic without traction in the human experience. And we were required to take a certain number of courses outside of philosophy when we figured out our focus for our dissertations. And I did mine in political science as my secondary area of study in order to inform my dissertation topic on express consent theories and the implications for citizenship.
And certainly, was it called social? It's called Social Philosophy and Policy. The journal itself is that comes out of Bowling Green, Fred Miller and those really prestigious interdisciplinary journal, though, very interdisciplinary. Sometimes whole issues would be devoted to one, practical topic, but from all different angles.
Yes, because even though the Social Philosophy and Policy Center, which my dissertation chair, Fred Miller, he was the executive director of while it was housed at Bowling Green for decades.
Right.
They would have professors from all different disciplines come and present on a particular topic, say natural law theory. And they would have economists, philosophers, political theorists, lawyers, occasionally people from literature if it worked well. So it was a wide variety of people. From different, so they made sure that it was highly interdisciplinary in terms of who presented, and the kind that really upped the ante on really wonderful questions people would ask, connections people would make. I found it to be a wonderful graduate educational experience.
Is that also where you picked up early editing skills? Were you helping edit the journal? Like what you do with Reason, what you've done at Reason Papers for many years, is that where that began?
Absolutely, because starting in the early to mid 1990s, when I was working my graduate degrees at Bowling Green, I was invited to do part of my graduate assistantship, and then I was employed part-time after the assistantship was up at the Social Philosophy and Policy Center as a copy editing assistant on their journal. So I really learned my editing chops there.
Now, I saw you gave a lecture, a really fabulous lecture, and you named three favorites among philosophers over the centuries: Aristotle, Locke, Rand. My question is, why those three, and which one did you come to first? And how do they relate to each other? Are they overlapping, or are they saying different things, same things? I'm curious why those three and how you came to them.
Okay, great question. They overlap in some ways, but not, so Aristotle and Rand overlap in some ways, and Locke and Rand overlap in different ways. And each of them are significantly different from Rand in important regards. Aristotle, what I really came to appreciate about Aristotle, not only his system of formal logic he developed, and the fact that he was such a systematic and kind of like developed the early scientific, if not, the scientific method, the way that say Bacon and others had in the early modern period developed, rooting it in experience. He had a proto-scientific method, and
Right.
he looked to the natural world to understand it and the natures of things to understand causality.
Yes.
And it was such a powerful account, and he systematically integrated those insights into the natural realm, from studying animals and plants to the nature of human beings, and he did it with a direct realism theory of perception.
Yeah.
That he incorporated as the grounding for understanding human nature to inform human ethics, politics, aesthetics. While I don't agree with everything he had argued about economics and law, this is where Locke enters the picture. Locke really revolutionized political philosophy.
Yeah.
And so what I appreciated about Locke was his not only critiquing Robert Filmer's divine right of kings theory and monarchism as such, but that he made individual rights front and center in the political domain, and that the individual is the starting point. He had a methodological individualism and discussed rights as something that's rooted in nature and not convention, and that it's not handed down by divine command through a king.
Yeah.
And his economic theory about you need to produce.
Yeah.
And so every person labors and has to create wealth. And then you trade that, and economies develop. Was an amazing insight for his time period.
And
the role of
that first amazing argument for private property, probably the first time anyone even thought of, how do you justify private property? The labor and all that. Yeah. Rand, different from the other two, how? Rand.
Well, she's also just as systematic as Aristotle and Locke in terms of going to fundamentals of metaphysics and epistemology, seeing how that spins out to the different domains.
Yeah.
What she added for me, first, most powerfully, because the first thing of hers I ever read when I was 19 was The Fountainhead. I fell in love with it right away. I stayed awake for 2.5 days to read it. I couldn't put it down. I loved it. I fell in love with the character of Howard Rourke, his fierce independence.
Yeah.
It was like the ultimate hero's journey, but one that's not based in fantasy and science fiction. This to me was, wow. He made a lot of choices and said things that resonated with me, because there were many ways in which I thought, I'm kind of similar and in standing up for what I believe in. And if that means I'm not going to make a lot of money right now because I'm pursuing what's of value to me and I'm creating something meaningful, and then so be it. I'm not going to compromise on my standards because other people want to pressure me into it. And so the gripping fictional example of somebody who was striving for a grand moral achievement, right? It's a heroic story in fiction, but one that also is very real. It's possible. I can make choices every single day of my life to work to achieve that in my own way, in the things that I find meaningful and purposive. So that's it. So the literature really grabbed me, just the joyful and benevolent spirit of it.
Yeah.
I just had never read, and I read voraciously all kind of literature, and this literature was like nothing I'd ever read before, and the ideas I just thought were marvelous.
Yeah, and the virtue of independence really runs through the Fountainhead so much. It's not like it doesn't have the other virtues. Of course, it does, productiveness and that rationality, but independence, yes. And I know you've said, and I know you believe pedagogically, you promote that in your students. I mean, you really want them to be independent thinkers, and right. Say a little bit about that you learn independence through Rand, but then you're also saying, this has to be instilled in my students too, if I can.
Absolutely. And before I speak to that particular point, there's one last piece of what drew me to Rand I'd like to say, because it was so different, even from Locke. Locke went so far, but Rand provided a moral justification for work in a way that also she avoided all kinds of false dichotomies that crop up in all kinds of other people's work. So she doesn't fall into the mind-body dichotomy, the self-other dichotomy. There's so many dichotomies she avoided. And because of that, the fact that you are the ultimate work of your life, your character, who you are as a self. She had the most integrative view of a human self I had ever encountered and have ever encountered. And that's at the root of her trader principle, like creating that value of you as a person, and freely trading what you create of value with others if they're willing to trade with you. And if they don't see value in what you create, then that's okay. So she gave this marvelous moral grounding of capitalism and of this harmonious way of individuals coming to one another with the best of themselves. And so that to me was also a big draw. And part of the best of you and to create things of value is this independence aspect. Because when you create things that really are not, they don't emerge from you. And I think this is as true of artistic works as of anything else, any kind of material product or service or whatnot, that when you create something that is authentic and stands apart, that reflects who you are. Like, it's not an end other people see its value. It can serve some of their needs. They see value in it. There's also that something extra special that independence achieves. You're not trying to imitate somebody else. You see something that you would like to bring into the world, and you can help create a niche that is very unique. And that comes about through independence. Independence has to be cultivated from the inside out.
Yep.
There's no other way. Nobody can give it to you. All of the virtues are achieved by you. Knowledge is achieved by an individual mind. Independence is achieved by looking at the world and trying to figure out what's true. And it doesn't mean you don't seek conversation from others or critiques from others, but that feeds into you reflecting on whether something's warranted to be believed. And my students would pressure me to say, oh, what do you think about this topic or this issue? I would refuse to answer and say, the only thing you're going to know that I believe is that it's important for you to think for yourself about anything you ever study. The intellectual independence on evidence-based grounds, evidence and reasoning and argumentation in the larger context of understanding how this holds up against competing views. But ultimately, you have to come to your own conclusions. If you don't choose to think and act by your own lights, there are lots of other people who do it for you. What kind of life will that be?
Yeah.
Is that a life worth living? Where is your meaning and purpose in your life if you are not there, if you have not independently achieved that? So they heard that loud and clear, and when they inhabited the space for students who were willing to take the courageous steps to work on those skills. They thanked me later for letting them learn how to know their own minds, because it made them less afraid to talk to other people.
That's fabulous. These three thinkers, it strikes me also, Dr. Biondi, that Aristotle, Locke, Rand, they were not rationalists. They were empiricists, if you want to use that word. They were into induction, basing their philosophies on reality, the facts of reality. And philosophy professors tend to get the reputation for being detached from reality, for dealing in abstractions that are unrelated to the real world. So I think that the fact that these are your three favorites, that must be known to students. They must see this. And then plus you're saying, by the way, the best part of philosophy is improving your life and flourishing. That must strike them as, wow, this is really a practical benefit. By the way, at some point you must have also realized, oh my gosh, I actually love a philosophy that's in the minority. So your own independence was necessary just to, fend off the idea of I am not in the majority here in regards to Rand, Locke, Aristotle, right? Generally in professional philosophy, those are not the three top ones among your colleagues, so to speak.
While that's true, at the time when I was absorbed in encountering and studying them, it never occurred to me that they were outsiders to the academy, because it didn't matter to me.
Yeah.
What other people thought really didn't matter to me.
That's what I love. Okay, that's what I love about you. I mean, that's the point. And there has been a revival in Aristotle scholarship, though, wouldn't you say, over the last 25 years? It's a lot more respectable than it was in the 60s and 70s.
Yes, and virtue ethics as a field in moral philosophy. There's a really great essay by Ms. Anscombe on modern moral philosophy.
Yeah.
And people like her, Philippa Foot, Rosalind Hursthouse, many others, really got swept up in the resurgence of virtue ethics as an alternative to utilitarianism and deontology. And I think that was a big part of the push.
Now, let's, if we could, because I think it's a good segue, and we're getting great questions, by the way. So those of you who have asked questions, I do have my eye on the questions, and I will turn to some of the questions. I'm trying to think how to fit them in here, but let me get a few more things out of Professor Biondi. I think it's a good segue when you talked about students and your expectations for them and promoting their independent thinking and stuff. I think this might be a good time for tell the audience a bit about your view of pedagogy or teaching methods or teaching systems. And specifically, I know you are very big on the Socratic approach. And I saw you in one presentation distinguish it from, well, obviously from the lecture approach, but also what you call the discussion approach, which isn't really the same thing as Socratic, this discussion idea of, throw an idea out there and it becomes a bull session. Could you talk a little bit about why you're so big on the Socratic method, what it is, why you're a believer in it? Is it applicable to all sorts of students, just small seminars? I'm curious, just your view of that pedagogy.
Okay. Well, I kind of backed my way into it because I knew that there was a lot lacking in my own education. I spent a lot of my time growing up was reading books in the library and, went through curriculum and they weren't allowed to give me stuff from the next year's curriculum. So I was like, okay, well, give me a pass to the library so I can at least read some more. So I would get A's on papers and I wouldn't know why.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I don't want to be like that.
Yeah.
And to be lectured, I knew that there's a lot I didn't understand. So when I started teaching early on in graduate school, I started teaching my own independent philosophy courses. I was groping for a different way of engaging with students, one that I would have appreciated had I been, their age.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do better. And so I was backing my way into, okay, here's this reading. So Socratic, what's central to Socratic, which makes it different from just a open-ended, like not anchored to anything discussion that can turn into a BS session, that what anchors Socratic is you have a shared object of study. So there's something real out there outside of your mind in the world that holds you and your conversation partners accountable, and you're trying to understand what this is together. But you also have to really carefully read it. And it may not be a reading, it could be a work of art, it could be a scientific experiment, it could be, studying architecture, whatever it happens to be, the object of study in the world. It is the thing to which you are accountable when you make claims. So you have to have evidence-based reasoning in a Socratic, and then based on what you're observing, what can you conclude from that? So Socratic's anchored in a shared object of study, and it's very rigorous, and you have to learn norms of conversation with people. So one person doesn't dominate. You draw in your conversation partners because you can get really awesome questions and insights from people that would never have occurred to you, perhaps by yourself, that provoke a new chain of reasoning for you to help enrich your thought process and provoke it further. So I found that, so I kind of backed my way into it. And fast forward 1996, 97, I came across a book in the library, the first one I'd ever seen on the Socratic Method, written by Michael Strong, who I was not going to meet in real life until like 20 years later. And now he's a friend of mine.
The Habit of Thought?
The Habit of Thought.
Oh, yeah.
One splendid book on the nature of Socratic seminars and Socratic practice and how to help students achieve being ready for that type of rigorous conversation. And I think it could be done across all kinds of subject matters. People like, oh, you can't do that in math and science. Yes, you can. And I think a key to understanding that is how I ultimately got interested in Montessori learning. Yeah. Because Montessori learning has you work with materials in the world, and you're actually building up a very precise mathematical understanding and going from particulars to basic concepts to higher levels of abstraction. And you can work with somebody who's a kind of specialist in the field, and other peers who are also interested in that particular area of study. And you discuss it, like, how do we tackle this problem? What's the next logical step? What's your evidence for that? And you kind of apprentice your way into learning.
It's interesting because the Montessori approach traditionally went up, I think, to the 11th or the 6th grade, which would be an 11-year-old. But the Socratic shares possibly with the Socratic method this idea of you respect the independence of the student, but you're also giving them a kind of a structured environment within which they can grow. And so the Socratic method, basically the idea, there is material that all are referring to, but you're asking them questions and you're probing. They're not leading questions, they're not loaded questions, but you're trying to invite from them an interpretation of it. Isn't part of it is that they interact with each other. The students start debating and discussing among each other. And I was fascinated. One time you said, especially if they're older, like if they're seniors in college, you said something really fascinating. You said, they get the idea of conveying ideas where they may disagree. So they get just used to disagreeing with each other, but disagreeing disagreeably. But then also they get used to what they'll eventually do in the workplace. They're going to be working with other people and differing on things. It could be business, could be the arts. So it helps too in that transition, right? You're preparing them for the transition.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are the kinds of, I don't know, people call this soft skills or whatever kind of skill you want to call it. These are transferable skills to any kind of workplace, any field of study, and to be able to be open to the world. And other human beings are part of the world, and they can be part of your ongoing conversation of learning the world better and helping you see things that you might have missed otherwise. Or pushing you to understand your own views better. If people challenge you, can you rise to the challenge, or do they have good counter evidence that you must take into account?
Yep. Speaking of Socratic dialogues, what's your favorite Plato? Do you have a favorite? I know you love the dialogues. You're not a Platonist, you're an Aristotelian, but I've read them too, and they're just adorable. I mean, they're so fun to read. A lot more fun to read maybe than Aristotle. Do you have a favorite?
Out of all the dialogues, my favorite to teach, and the one that I think provoked me to think about a wide variety of issues more than any other, might be surprised, is a relatively brief dialogue, the Credo.
Oh gosh, didn't want to tell you what my favorite was. I was just hoping you would say the Credo.
Okay. I had no idea that was yours too, but
and I teach it at Duke. But tell us a bit about. I mean, this is the hemlock and the whole thing. This is okay.
He doesn't.
No, it's later.
Spoiler alert: he doesn't drink the hemlock till the Phaedo.
But this is after his trial, right? And Socrates has been condemned, and he's in prison, and he's got his buddies coming to him saying, "Hey, we can spring you." And okay, tell me why you like it.
In addition to being relatively brief so that students have the time to read it a few times,
that's true.
It immediately brings to the surface issues that are important to students. And they're at a time in their life when they're deeply meaningful to them. So here's Crito begging Socrates to get sprung out of prison. He's raised money. He says, Socrates, you're my friend. I don't want to see you die. We don't want to lose the most amazing person we've ever met. Yeah. So friendship is on the table. What would you do for a friend?
Right.
And Socrates is trying to persuade his friend that if he really values what Socrates values as a friend, he needs to understand why Socrates is doing this as a matter of personal integrity. He needs to let Socrates be himself. Now, I don't agree with all the things that Socrates says, but his example of living and dying with integrity is extremely powerful. The conversation about what friends should or shouldn't do is very powerful. And the issue of civil disobedience.
Yes.
Students love discussing. We could discuss the Crito dialogue for a month and not run out of things to discuss about it, how that sparks students to think about, well, what's the justification for obedience to laws? Is there one? What is it? What would you be willing to do if you thought a law was unjust?
Right. And everyone in the Crito, Socrates himself, who's a victim, they all believe he's been unjustly convicted. And yet Socrates is saying, okay, but I'm not going to go against the rule. If we don't have the rule of law and civility, I don't like how this came out against me, but it's so powerful. Yeah.
And he said, look, I have chosen to live under these laws for 70 years. And I knew that the deal was persuade people to change the law or obey them. I tried to persuade them. I'm not willing to stop practicing philosophy.
Yeah.
So he knows what he's doing is against the laws. He can't persuade them to change them or to let him off the hook. So he's going to obey them. Whew.
Who is I'm amazed that you cite that. Yeah, but you probably know the dialogues better than I do. But I love that one. Okay,
I did translate this one out of the ancient Greek, so I know it pretty well.
Who's better on friendship, Aristotle or Rand? On the issue, the virtue, it's not really a virtue, but how would you characterize Aristotle's view of friendship? Is it similar to Rand's? Does he have more to say about it than she? I'm just curious. Friendship, Aristotle, Rand. What do you think? I know you've thought a lot about this and written about it. Friendship.
I have, and actually I'm working on a new project. I'm going to present at a conference next month on Aristotle and Ayn Rand on friendship. So I'm actually in the middle of fleshing out this. I think Aristotle's views about character friendship, because he's ethically an egoist and provides a really wonderful justification for the value that what he calls it's kind of a virtue. He doesn't call it a straight out virtue. He says it's like a virtue. Of friendship, the value of character friends and the role that plays in achieving a good life. He spends 20% of the Nicomachean Ethics, books 8 and 9, just on friendship. It's a marvelous account. So he gives a lot of philosophical space to it.
Yeah.
While Rand doesn't, in her nonfiction work, she doesn't have extensive discussions about friendship, certainly nothing near as well as what Aristotle had written about. But what she does is she exemplifies it in her novels. Yeah. So Rourke starts out with the only person who he's quasi friends with, and I wouldn't call him a character friend, is Peter Keating. Otherwise, we don't see him having friends. And so he develops deeply meaningful, what I think Aristotle will call character friendships, right? People attracted by one another's seeking to live up to the best within them, being moved to live good lives, and being willing to be dedicated to the truth and to pushing one another toward that best within them. And she shows how Rourke develops these very close friendships with Mike Donegan and Stephen Mallory, and we see him collect a very small cohort of deeply meaningful friendships in the course of the narrative. And John Galt has two friends he met from college age who they had been through thick and thin together. So I think Rand shows in her novels what is really in many ways resonant with Aristotle's character friendship.
Imagine you see two friends have a falling out, and one of them says, I'm not loyal to a person, I'm loyal to principles. What is that? How does that sound to you? Does that sound okay?
In a way, yes, and in a way, no. Okay. Sorry, that's a very Aristotelian response.
That's okay.
It understood in some way, yes, and in a qualified way, no.
Yeah.
My first published article was on the possibility of liberal patriotism, like can classical liberalism defend patriotism?
Yeah.
That is love of one's country.
Yes.
And I actually made parallels between that argument I was running, that yes, you can love your country. A necessary condition is that it embodies and seeks to live up to, even if it imperfectly does so, the principles you think are right and good.
Right.
But that's not a sufficient condition for selecting this particular state.
Yeah.
And I thought there's this interesting parallel between that phenomenon and friends. So there are certain things that are, in terms of underlying values or principles, that are deal breakers for me. Like I might be able to civilly get along with a wide variety of people up to a point, but people who are going to become my character friends, there are certain principles or values that would need to be present as a necessary condition. But not everybody who holds those principles or seeks those values do I end up becoming friends with. It just doesn't gel. Rand has this wonderful phrase about the style of a person's soul. So everybody's so amazingly unique, and they have different ways about them that may attract you, and in other individuals, the way that those ideas are held or embodied, it just doesn't quite sit the same way. So to the extent that the necessary and sufficient conditions are present, the principles are there, and there's the in particular embodiment of that in a person. If somebody's sincerely in good faith striving to live up to those principles, I think that the distinction, like I'm loyal to principles and not persons per se, it's like, well, it's not like there's this disembodied value and idea hopping around out there outside of a body. I'm loyal to that. That makes no sense. That's a
friends may
floating abstraction.
Yeah, so friends may disappoint us, and then we have to make the judgment of, is that an out of the ordinary thing? Is that them, or is that a repeat offense or something like that? That's a good distinction. I'm going to go to some of these comments and questions, and
Sure.
I have to start with this one. You will love this. I don't know, you have a fan out there. It says, she would do well with her own talk show. She is the kind of person you would definitely invite into your living room. Okay, so that's not really a question, but I love that comment.
Thank you.
So you have someone who will sign up for a living room chat with you. Okay, some other ones. Well, your favorite book by Rand, I assume it's The Fountainhead. Favorite book is The Fountainhead.
The favorite fiction book is The Fountainhead.
Favorite character?
Howard Rourke.
Rourke. I thought you'd say that. Okay, here's one. You and I actually talked off stage about this. What do you think of Mike Rowe? Who is he? And what do you think of him?
Oh, Mike Rowe is awesome.
Who is he?
Mike Rowe is a TV host, a narrative voice who does voiceovers for different shows. But the thing that really put him on the map that drew my attention was the show Dirty Jobs.
Yeah.
which he actually didn't like that title, and I'm glad.
Yeah.
Because he explains in a book he wrote later called Profoundly Disconnected that he thinks that there's no such thing as dirty work, clean work. Yeah, you might get dirty doing certain types of work, like physically,
Yeah.
but it's not good work, bad work, blue, white collar work. There's honest work done well or poorly. That's your choice.
That's
And,
Ayn Rand said that, right? I love that. Yeah.
and Mike Rowe said that. Montessori said that 100 years
yeah.
ago. Montessori said that 100 years ago.
Carrie-Ann, in the opening pages of Atlas, I'll never forget, the description is a bus expertly steered. A bus expertly steered. And I'm thinking, even bus drivers can do their job well or badly. Yeah.
Absolutely. So and so that attracted my attention. Like, well, here's somebody who wants to put a focus on the noble nature of doing honest work and seeking to do it well and creating value in the world and making a living. You don't necessarily have to go to college for that. He's not somebody who says you should never go to college, but that should be a very conscious choice. And if you need to work and save up or work while you're in school, which is what I had done,
right,
to pay for it, I didn't go into student debt. I very carefully, I found this appealing. Mike Rowe's focus on this is if you want something of value, you work for it. But for a lot of students who are shifting into taking on, like he said, crippling student debt.
Yes.
And for what purpose? Not necessarily even getting something of value for it. And when they could have, done something else. It's not that or defer going to college until you save up enough, or seek a lower cost alternative to maybe achieve the same or superior type of knowledge for something that will help you live a flourishing life. So he has what's called the Mike Rowe Works Foundation, where he raises money for scholarships for people who want to go into the trades, whether they're young or whether they're shifting jobs mid-career. So I really deeply respect that as opening up the alternatives of what not everybody should feel compelled to go to college or take on crippling student debt. There's nothing to be ashamed of if you want to be a welder.
Yeah.
If you love doing that, like Mike Donegan is described in the Fountainhead, he loves his work as an electrician. He's amazing at it. And I would want to be friends with Mike Donegan. So
I'm now going to combine three different questions. I think they're related. One of them was, how does she apply ethics to her own life? Now, before you answer that, that's a huge question, right? I'm going to combine it with something you recently did in your life, which is leave academia. But let me back that up with, which was one of the questions also, why did you leave? But then there's this other question, which I'll throw in as well. They're all related. Do you think there's something that attracts charlatans to academia? Do you think there's a way to get people with honesty and integrity into academia? Can we fix the colleges, or should we just bulldoze them? Well, so I think they're related. So they're at your view of the universities, maybe why you left, but that's got to be an application of ethics to your life. So thoughts on that?
Okay, well, those are a series of very large, though not unrelated questions.
Yeah.
There's a recently published interview where I give an extensive accounting of why I chose to leave academia after 25 years of teaching in it, working all my life to be a teacher in it. So there's a much longer account, so I'll give a much briefer version here.
Is that the interview in the Objective Standard?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so let's plug that. There's an excellent, just released, right, interview with Dr. Biondi. So look for this at the Objective Standard. Yes, I read that, and there is a good account in there of that. Okay, great.
Okay, yes. So that's the longer version. Just to recap very briefly here, there are really two parts. One was epistemological. While I relished the challenge for a certain amount of time, I was spending about 50% of my time addressing, I would call them epistemological issues with students not knowing how to learn, or they thought they were great students. I had worked with a lot of honor students, and some of them truly were honors quality, like really standout people and thinkers. But a lot of them, they thought that they were good students because they memorized things and had gotten A's and reward. They had got high SAT scores, high GPAs from their high schools.
Yeah.
And when I asked them to just give a brief analysis of a passage in a work like the Credo, or what do you think? Do you think this is true or false? What are your reasons why not? They would completely either blank out on the latter skill, like have no idea whether something's true or false, or how to even provide a reason for it. And with the former skill, like they would pick out a couple of words and say, that's what this is about. I was like, well, you identified kind of an idea or point in it, but what does that mean? Unpack and explain it.
Yeah.
And they struggle to do it.
Yeah.
If you can't do those minimal skills, that's not really passing quality of work in an introductory philosophy course in the first year of college. And they're like, well, I never got an F before. But you just did. Let's find out why. You can grow from that. Don't be afraid to fail.
Is it being in it for so many years? Is this a decline you saw over time, or was this more recent in your case? Or?
No, I've noticed this trend for a long time, but I think I wasn't as self-aware of the patterns until the last maybe decade of teaching. Like I just dealt like, this is where the students are at. Let me help them develop the skills so we can get to really awesome classroom discussions, and maybe they'll have breakthroughs in their writing. And after a while, I was like, but why is this happening? And so I started investigating more deeply. Why are students coming to college in this epistemologically broken way to a very large extent? So that was one big issue. And I wanted to help address that. Like, how can I be part of the solution for increasing numbers of students not coming to the age of 18 and being in that position? How can I help be a part of the solution instead of complaining about how unprepared they are? Let me be part of the solution and not complaining about the problem. So that was part of it. The other is just an escalating politicization of the university, of academia. And that's a much bigger topic that I don't think we have time to really delve into. It's a whole separate, perhaps, discussion of its own about the perverse institutional structures of academia. But there are lots of well-meaning people go into it. And they are seeking, many of them, they want to educate students. They want to help them achieve lives of meaning and purpose. But they were not, many people in graduate school were never equipped to do that. We never took courses in how to teach in graduate school. Unless you proactively, like you were just thrown into a teaching assistantship position, and rarely did you engage in discussions with your fellow graduate students or your faculty about how to create a syllabus, why to create it this way, what are the driving questions, how do you assess work, how do you give feedback, what do you do when you encounter plagiarism? I was lucky at Bowling Green. We actually did have something called the Graduate Pro Seminar where we did hash out these issues. It was, to me, a drop in the bucket of what really good preparation for being a professor could be, but it was better than most other places. So a lot of people, they just replicate the bad models from what went before. They go in and lecture at their students. They don't know how to grade papers. So they grade inflate because they don't want flack from their students, because they want to get tenure. So there are a lot of perverse incentives that if people don't willingly step back and thoughtfully figure out how to do this well, it's very easy for people to be sucked into that. And those are the well-meaning people.
Yeah, so I recommend that listeners go read that interview of Dr. Biondi. One of the things she mentions on the politicization is dickering with syllabuses. Syllabuses are usually off limits. The administration is not supposed to tell you what to put on the syllabus and how to teach it. And when they start penetrating that, it's pretty bad. There are other political aspects of it, but that's, when you said that, I knew exactly what that meant. That is precious ground that should not be invaded. And apparently they were starting to invade it. Oh, I have a question now here from, just shifts a little bit. I think the rest of these questions, Dr. Biondi, switch more to they're in the general category of what do you think of the objectivist movement? How's it going? What's the best way? But specifically, the Atlas Society CEO, Jennifer Grossman, asks, are you surprised that objectivism hasn't gained more currency in our culture? And do you have any ideas on how to more effectively spread Rand's ideas? So just the position of what's the state of the movement? Maybe there's no movement, the variety in the movement, the lack thereof. What do you think of just generally objectivism and its acceptance or not in the general culture?
This is also another large question. I will try to take a stab at this.
Could have an whole hour on this. Yeah.
Easily. There are people who were seeking to foster an objectivist movement. I actually have never counted myself among that.
Yeah.
I have, by and large, in my life, pursued things of value to me.
Yes.
And as someone who is drawn toward and agrees with a lot of Rand's work and the basic principles of objectivism, I have sought to live up to the highest moral and epistemological standards of that in my own life, in my own ways.
Yeah.
And when I came across, there's something that Rand herself wrote about the objectivist movement and the possibility of objectivist movement first in a 1968 article in her newsletter. And she said, well, that's a movement is not the way to go about it. So there are individuals pursuing lives of value, living according to principle. And when a lot of times a movement is like people typically see it as a cause to carry, which can lead to undermining your ability to pursue your values in some way. And when you have a movement, I think people start getting a little tribal in terms of this is what the movement stands for, and this is what I'm fighting for, and it's us against them. And now we have to, how are we going to change the culture? And Rand has a great essay, What Can One Do? It's like that, and I agree with her. This is not the way to tackle approaching anything about change. The only thing you can directly change is yourself. And take ownership over the choices in your own life. Every single day of your life, you're faced with a bajillion choices. And in good faith, as frontally and directly and honestly as possible, make the best choice possible every single day. And that kind of modeling, living like that, is a very powerful thing for other people to see. And so that's an important, so I resist the whole idea of movement stuff. That's not how I have ever lived. It's not how I think. I know some people do. And when people do that, it can, I think, distort their own particular personal objectives in some cases. The other part of the question was why, or at least an aspect of the question was, why are not a lot of people embracing Rand's ideas in the culture at large? Well, Rand's ideas came on the scene less than 100 years ago. So they've really been in the culture since the 1940s with the publication of the Fountainhead. And these ideas are revolutionary. They threaten a lot of sacred cows. She points out a whole series of false dichotomies in the history of human thought and philosophy. And for people to, there's so many sides of the false dichotomy that people buy into that are so firmly fixed to their identities that they it's a lot of work, one person at a time, for people to be persuaded to change their mind, and ultimately they're the ones who have to change their own minds, and so going out to seek people to convert or to change their minds, it's like, I don't do that either. I don't proselytize for objectivism. I'm just myself. And if people want to discuss ideas, I do. They want to know my reasons, I offer them. And we have debates or arguments if they wish. And sometimes they change their minds, and a lot of times they don't. And that's, I'm not sure that's the most satisfactory answer. Some people might not be satisfied with my response to that, but I think that that's true.
It's a great answer. Now, this is an interesting comment. Someone said, this is more out of chagrin than anything, but I know you do write about this field. Chris Baker says, I wish the objectivist movement, oh, there's that movement again, had encouraged more people in creative work. We need more actors, musicians, singers, movie directors, authors, songwriters, cartoonists. Now, to put in a plug for Atlas Society, we do promote cartoonists and various other visual medium and stuff. So, but that's a good point. I mean, the thought is maybe, it's not really a question, but do you have any comments on that? Because I know part of your work, which is so fascinating, is applying philosophy to popular culture, like Harry Potter books, like Jane Eyre, and so you like doing movie analysis and stuff. So any thoughts on why aren't there more objectivist or objectivist leaning people, call it in the arts and entertainment and maybe even sports? Or maybe that's
okay. So I do have some thoughts on this. I don't think there are more or less individuals who are objectivists in those fields than in any others. Objectivists are a relatively small fraction of a percent in any field.
Yeah.
So I don't think the arts are an exception.
Yeah.
I also don't fully agree that we need more. It's like, who am I to place demands on what other people should be creating?
Right.
And also sometimes people pursue work in the arts, not because it organically and authentically emerges from them as their passion. Like Howard Rourke wanted to be an architect since he was 10.
Yeah.
Nobody placed that demand on him. He was drawn toward it.
Right.
It's what he wanted. I wanted to be a teacher. Nobody told me that.
Right.
So and when people say I should create objectivist art, that often ends up being the worst art I've ever seen. Really, because people like ham-fistedly think I'm going to impose objectivist principles on this medium.
Right.
I would not recommend doing it that way. People might wish to be writers or sculptors or painters, and they might also be objectivists, but you need to be an artist first.
Yeah. And
pursue the vision that you love, and it will be authentically you and organically emerge as the beautiful object and work that you've created. And if it does or doesn't obviously reflect objectivist principles, that's secondary. That's secondary to being yourself, always.
Here's a compliment, Dr. Biondi. You are the first person who has articulated the way I taught my inner city middle school students. Thank you so much for validating my something about my, but never answering my question or something like that. I think that's a compliment. Okay, we are coming to the end. So any final thoughts where we can go to get more of your work? Do you have any place we might go, or is there a central location to learn more about what you're doing?
Most of my work is uploaded to academia.edu.
Okay.
Not all of it, but the vast bulk of it is there. And there's some other works that are more popular and not academic in orientation.
Yeah.
That if you just Google me,
okay,
I have published in some more popular outlets, especially when I'm doing pop culture and philosophy or movie or play critiques.
Yes, I have found the same thing. I mean, I knew much of your work, but in Googling in the last couple of weeks or so, yes, very much available on the internet, very much great interviews, great talks and things like that. Yes, go ahead.
And on academia.edu, I do maintain an updated CV that people can look at, and everything I've done, it's kept fairly current. Everything I've done is on there, and external links to pop culture stuff will take you outside of that website.
Right, and one of the things we didn't talk about today, but actually you did for the Atlas Society, I think back in 2014, also available on the at YouTube, Enemies of Capitalism, a two-part lecture at the Atlas Summit, I think it was up in New Hampshire, right, 2014, and she discusses Marx, McIntyre, and Rawls. So McIntyre was a conservative, actually. So criticisms of capitalism coming from the socialists, the conservatives, and then the welfare statists, who was Rawls. So check those out as well. Those are very good, and that was done for the Atlas Society. That was fun. We have to wrap up now, but I also wanted to plug in about 5 minutes. Jennifer Grossman's going to be talking with Stephen Hicks. Dr. Biondi, I know you know Stephen Hicks. So you're a big fan. You're fans of each other. Clubhouse, and the topic is capitalism good or bad for women? That's a great topic. Clubhouse is, if you know, a special app where you go in and it's not visual, it's auditory only, but it's like you're on a conference call and you get to join the conversation and listen to the conversation. So it's very cool. Clubhouse, just go to Atlas Society looking for Clubhouse. Dr. Biondi, we are out of time, it's too bad. It's too bad we're out of time. We could have spoken for 3 hours, right, about some of these things. So I want to thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it as well.
I did. Thank you, Richard.
You're very, very welcome. And please come back. Let me close this by saying that I thank all of you, not just Professor Biondi, but all of you for joining us today. And again, I'm Richard Salsman, a senior scholar at the Atlas Society. If you enjoyed this, if you enjoyed the video, and it will be available later, or any of our other materials, just consider making a tax-deductible contribution to TAS. And then also another Atlas Asks coming up. Remember, this is the 73rd episode, so you can look at 72 prior ones that are very cool. But next week, the interviewee will be Blake Harris. Blake Harris will be the guest for the next episode of Atlas Society. Dr. Biondi, great to see you. I will see you again. Thank you all for joining, and I'll sign off now. Thank you so much. Great to see you.